The single candle in Dorothy Callahan's kitchen window didn't just light the room that night. It weighted the whole street down. Every other house on Sycamore Drive had gone dark. Power out since 8:47 p.m., the whole east grid of Bozeman knocked flat by the ice, and every door on that block was shut, every curtain drawn, every person sealed inside against what the radio had been calling the worst January storm in 11 years. But at the far end of the street, where the road curved and the pavement gave out, there was that one amber light, steady, small. The kind of light that, if you were desperate enough, you'd walk toward. Chris Hemsworth was that desperate. He hadn't told anyone where he was going. That was the point. The memorial ride was his alone. Once a year, same weekend, same route through the Montana backcountry. A private thing he did for a man named Danny Kowalski, who had died of a brain aneurysm at 41. Danny had been a stunt coordinator on the first Thor film. He was the man who had taught a 27-year-old Australian actor, fresh off a soap opera nobody in America had heard of, how to move like someone who actually knew how to fight. They trained together for 6 weeks before the first day of shooting. They stayed close for years after. When Danny died, Chris didn't post about it. He didn't give interviews about it. He just started riding, every January, alone on a borrowed Harley, no security detail, no assistant, no black SUV following at a distance. Just the road, and the cold, and the particular silence of a man keeping a promise to someone who couldn't hear it anymore. He was wearing a worn canvas jacket, faded jeans, a knit cap pulled low over his ears, the kind of clothes a man wears when he doesn't want to be anyone in particular. He was 6'3" and broad as a door frame, and the way he moved on the bike was quiet, almost careful. The particular ease of someone who had spent years learning how to carry his own size without announcing it. The storm came in from the northwest, faster than anyone had forecast. By the time the first hard gust hit, visibility was already down to 30 feet. By the time the road glazed over near mile marker 11, it was too late to turn back. The front tire went, just gone. 1 second he was on it, the next the bike was sideways. 800 pounds of metal sliding across frozen asphalt with a sound like tearing. He went down, rolled twice, came up on one knee, took stock. Left knee, hip, shoulder. Nothing broken. He'd been trained to fall. Years of boxing, Muay Thai, stunt work for roles that required a body that could absorb damage without catastrophizing. That training, right now, had just saved him something significant. He got up. The bike wouldn't start. Electrical, most likely. The cold had gotten into something it shouldn't. He checked his phone. 1 bar, then none. The tower a mile north was iced over. He wouldn't learn that detail until later. What he knew right now, temperature dropping, road empty, and the faint glow of a town visible through the tree line about 3 miles south. Bozeman outskirts. Population on this particular road, not much. He chained the bike to the guardrail, pocketed the key, pulled his jacket tighter, and started walking south into the wind. Let me tell you something about walking alone in a Montana blizzard. The cold doesn't feel like cold at first. It feels like pressure, something leaning on you from every direction at once. Your face goes first, then your hands, and after that it gets quiet in a way that isn't peaceful. A quiet that means something important is being used up. Chris had done cold weather training for film shoots in Iceland and Norway. He knew what that quiet meant. He kept moving. It took him 90 minutes to reach the edge of Sycamore Drive. Every house was dark. He knocked on the first door. Nothing. Knocked harder. A dog barked somewhere inside and then went quiet, and that was it. He tried the second house. A light moved behind a window shade. Then didn't move again. He stood on that porch for a moment with snow building on his shoulders and said nothing. He was shaking. Not violently, but steadily. The particular shiver that means the body has been losing the argument for a while. Then he saw it, at the far end of the street. That candle. He walked toward it. But here's what you need to understand before we get to that door. You need to know who was on the other side of it, because that matters just as much as what happened next. Dorothy Callahan, Dot, to everyone who knew her, had been a registered nurse for 34 years. She'd worked labor and delivery at Bozeman Health for most of that time, then pediatric urgent care for the last 6, until her knees told her they were finished, and she listened. She retired at 66. She lived alone on Sycamore Drive in a 1970s ranch house she and her husband Gerald had bought in 1988 for $74,000, the kind of price that felt enormous then and unimaginable now. Gerald had passed 8 years ago. Cardiac event, fast, no warning. She'd held his hand in the ambulance, and then she'd held it in the hospital room, and then she'd come home alone and put his reading glasses in the top drawer of the nightstand and hadn't moved them since. She was 70 years old. Silver hair cut short and practical, hands that showed 34 years of real work, and a face that had the particular quality of someone who had seen enough hard things to stop being surprised by them, but not enough to stop caring. Now let me tell you about Dot's situation, because it matters. She lived on a retirement pension and Social Security, $1,260 a month combined, which in Bozeman in 2024 was the kind of number that required constant, quiet arithmetic. Property taxes had gone up 3 years running as the town grew, and the land values climbed around her. Her heating bill in January ran $280 on a good month. The furnace was 12 years old and made a sound every morning like it was deliberating. She owed $3,400 on a medical bill from a knee procedure the previous spring. It lived in a kitchen drawer. She opened the drawer sometimes, looked at it, and closed it again. But here is what Dot Callahan did with what she had. She volunteered 2 mornings a week at the pediatric clinic on Main Street. Not as a nurse now, just as an extra pair of hands, someone to sit with frightened kids in the waiting room, someone to read to them. 4 years without being asked, without stopping. She brought soup to her neighbor Frank Aldridge when his wife was in the hospital for 2 weeks in November, left it on his porch in a covered pot, rang the bell, walked away before he could answer. She watched the Peterson kids 3 doors down on Thursday evenings so their mother, alone all week, while their father worked construction in Billings, could have 2 hours to herself. She didn't talk about any of it, not as generosity, not as sacrifice, just as what you did when you were paying attention. Her neighbor Nora Beckett, 34 years old, physical therapist at the sports medicine clinic on College Street, was the person who understood Dot best. Nora had moved in next door 3 years ago, fresh out of a difficult divorce, and Dot had shown up on her porch the second week with a casserole and zero pity and said, "Eat this, then come over tomorrow morning and I'll teach you how to make it." They'd been close since. Nora knew about the medical bill. She knew about the furnace sound. She knew Dot wouldn't accept help directly and had to be approached sideways the way you approach something you don't want to startle. Now, there was one person on Sycamore Drive who did not share this quiet understanding of Dot. His name was Roger Hatch. He lived directly across the street. A 58-year-old retired insurance broker who had moved to Bozeman 6 years ago from Scottsdale, drawn by the property values and the mountain views and the idea of a quieter life. Roger was not a cruel man. He was something more ordinary than that. The kind of person who had never thought very hard about his neighbors, had never needed to, and had quietly arranged his life so that he never had to start. He drove a late model, black German sedan. He kept his lawn edged to a precise degree. He had told his wife Karen once, when she mentioned Dot's leaking roof, that the woman should really look into a reverse mortgage if she couldn't keep up with maintenance costs. He said it without malice. He just said it the way people say things when they have never once been in a position where $3,400 in a drawer was the edge of everything. On the night of the blizzard, Roger had been the second house Chris knocked on. He had seen the shape of a large man on his porch through the curtain of the front window. He had taken one step toward the door, then stopped. Too big, too dark, too much he didn't know. He had moved the curtain back into place and gone back to the living room, to the fire, to the glass of bourbon he'd poured when the power went out. He hadn't thought about it again. It was a reasonable decision, he told himself. It was a safe decision. And in the morning, when the storm was over, he looked across the street and saw Dot's house, same as always, and thought nothing of it. That was Dot, the kind of person the system had no category for. Not poor enough to qualify for assistance. Not connected enough to be noticed. Just there, making it work, quietly making other people's lives a little better, while the man across the street returned to his bourbon and called it common sense. The night of January 14th, Dot had done everything she always did before a big storm. Filled every pot with water, checked the propane on the backup heater, stacked extra blankets on the couch, lit the oil lamp on the kitchen windowsill because the power went out on this street every hard winter without exception, and she'd learned to be ahead of it. She'd been sitting in the living room for 2 hours, listening to the wind work its way through the eaves when the knock came. 3 knocks. Hard, not frantic. The knock of someone who needed an answer and had already burned through everything else. Dot set down her tea. She looked at the door. She thought about what her daughter in Denver would say if she called right now and described this situation. She picked up the flashlight from the side table. She walked to the door. She put her hand on the knob. And here's where most people in most stories hesitate long enough that the story becomes about the hesitation. But that's not what happened here. She opened the door. The man on her porch was enormous. 6'3", broad through the shoulders, snow-caked from knit cap to boots, jacket soaked through. Hands visibly shaking, a dried cut on his chin from the fall. And eyes, she looked at them the way she had looked at patients for 34 years. The eyes of someone who had been walking in the cold for a long time and was down to the last of something. He said very quietly, "Ma'am, I'm sorry to knock this late. My bike went down on the highway and I've been walking. I just need to get out of the cold for a little while. That's all I need." The wind pushed snow sideways across the porch. Dot looked at his face. She looked at his hands. She looked at the cut on his chin. Then she made the only decision that made sense to her. She opened the door all the way. "Come inside," she said. "Right now. Before you fall over on my porch." He stepped in and the cold came with him, a wave of it that moved through the room and made the oil lamp flicker once. He stood in her living room and dripped melting snow onto the hardwood and looked around with the careful attention of someone taking in their surroundings. Not nervously, but methodically, the way a person does when they're used to being in unfamiliar places and staying alert in them. Dot looked at him the way she looked at any problem, like a list of things that needed doing, starting with the most urgent. "Sit down," she said. She pointed to the kitchen chair nearest the propane heater. He sat carefully, the way people sit when something hurts and they've decided not to mention it. She went to the hall closet, came back with Gerald's first aid kit, a white metal box, red cross on the front, kept stocked for 30 years out of habit and professional instinct. She sat across from him at the kitchen table, took his right hand in both of hers without asking, and looked at what the road had done to it. Knuckles split in 2 places, palm torn with gravel rash from the slide across the asphalt. She cleaned it with saline, methodical, unhurried, the way she had done 10,000 similar things. He watched her work without saying anything. His jaw was still tight from cold, but his face was composed in a way that told her he was used to managing pain without broadcasting it. "This is going to sting," she said. "It already does," he said. She almost smiled. She finished the hand, applied ointment, bandaged it with the neat efficiency of someone who had wrapped a lot of wounds. Then she cleaned the cut on his chin. Then she looked at his eyes, not asking, just looking, the reflex of 34 years. Pupils equal and reactive. She noted it more to herself than to him. "You're a nurse," he said. "Was," she said. "Retired. It doesn't really leave you." She stood and went to the stove. A pot of beef and vegetable soup from that afternoon. Enough for 2 days of her lunches. She ladled a full bowl, cut thick slices from Sunday's bread, put them in front of him. She put the kettle on. He looked at the bowl, then at her. "Ma'am, I don't want to eat your food." Then you're going to sit there hungry, and that's going to be awkward for both of us, she said. Eat the soup. He ate. She stood at the counter and watched, and the clinical part of her mind that never fully switched off noted things. The shiver, decreasing as warmth worked inward. The way he held the spoon, a slight adjustment of grip that suggested the right hand was more damage than he was letting on, a compensation that came automatically, not thought about. The way he looked around the room when he thought she wasn't watching. The oil lamp, the propane heater, the windows with the old storm film she'd taped up in October, the furnace along the wall that was not making any sound because it was not running. He was the kind of person who noticed things and didn't announce them. At one point, he stood to refill his own mug from the kettle, and as he passed the kitchen table, his hand went out and steadied it. An automatic adjustment, weight redistributed, table no longer rocking. He'd noticed the uneven leg the moment he sat down. He said nothing about it. He just fixed it in passing and kept moving. Dot noticed. She filed it away beside the grip adjustment, beside the way he'd scanned the room, and said nothing. She went to the bedroom and came back with Gerald's heavy Carhartt. Dark brown canvas, wool-lined. Gerald had worn it every winter for 15 years. She brought it to the kitchen. "Put this on," she said. "It was my husband's. He doesn't need it anymore, and you do." The man looked at the coat. Something moved across his face. Not sentiment exactly, but the particular expression of someone receiving something they weren't sure they were allowed to have. He took it. He put it on. He sat with both hands around the mug of tea she'd placed in front of him and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "I'm Chris." "Dot," she said. They shook hands, her small one in his bandaged one. She asked about him the way she asked everyone. Not intrusively, just the ordinary courtesy of paying attention. He was careful in his answers. Personal trip, phone dead, bike chained to a guardrail on Route 191. He did this ride once a year, he said, for someone who had died, and it was important to him to do it alone. He said that last part quietly, without explanation, and Dot didn't ask for one. She told him about Gerald, about how Gerald would have already been in the garage looking for tools by now, about the clinic, about the Peterson kids, about the soup on Frank Aldridge's porch. She told him the furnace made a sound every morning, and she was learning to live with it. He listened the way people rarely listened, without waiting for his turn. He asked one question about Gerald, the right one, and she answered it. Later, when she went to hang his jacket by the heater to dry, she turned it over in her hands for a moment before she put it on the hook. On the left chest pocket, barely visible on the dark canvas, a small embroidered logo, a circle, a stylized C in the center. Clean, minimal, the kind of logo that costs money to design. Below it, in letters almost too small to read, Center. She hung the jacket up, went back to her chair, looked at the man named Chris sitting in Gerald's coat in her kitchen, and she thought about the logo, and about the grip adjustment, and about the way he moved through a small space as if he'd learned long ago how to make himself less than his actual size. Something moved at the edge of her mind. She let it go. She made more tea. He slept on the couch. She gave him the quilts and the wool blanket. She set her alarm for 5:30 and lay in the dark and listened to the storm work itself out. She didn't sleep much. She got up twice to check the propane level. At 2:30 in the morning, she stood at the kitchen counter in the dark and made biscuits from scratch. Last of the flour, last of the buttermilk, because that was what you did when someone was sleeping in your living room and they were going to need to eat in the morning. She put them in the oven and sat at the kitchen table and waited. There was a magazine on the table. She'd been using it to prop up the short leg since November, when the wood had cracked slightly. A copy of Men's Health, 8 rolls, come in the mail as part of a free trial subscription she'd never requested. She'd been meaning to recycle it. She picked it up now, in the 2:30 kitchen quiet, and looked at the cover for the first time. A man in a gray fitted shirt. Strong jaw, easy smile, blonde going silver at the temples. Cover line, Chris Hemsworth on wellness, fatherhood, and the fitness app changing the game. Smaller text below, Inside Center, the billion-dollar wellness empire you might not know he built. Dot looked at the magazine. She looked at the doorway to the living room. She looked at the jacket on the hook by the heater, the small logo on the chest pocket. She set the magazine face up on the table. The biscuits smelled good. The propane heater hummed. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to ease. She put the magazines back under the table leg. She went and got the strawberry preserves from the pantry shelf. Okay, hold on. I need to stop here for a second. Because this woman just figured out she had one of the most famous people on the planet asleep on her couch, and she went and got the jam. That's Dot Callahan. That tells you everything. Keep listening, because what happened next is the part that changes the whole story. In the morning, clean light came through the storm-filmed windows. The wind had stopped. 2 feet of snow on the ground, and a sky the particular blue that only shows up after something hard has passed through. Chris woke to the smell of coffee and biscuits and sat up slowly on the couch, and Dot was already at the stove in her apron, moving the way she always moved, efficient, unhurried, like a person who had never once wasted emotion. He ate 3 biscuits. She watched him from the counter and said nothing about the magazine. When he finished, he reached into the inside pocket of Gerald's coat. Still wearing it, she noticed, and set $400 bills on the table. Dot looked at the money, then at him. Then she pushed it back across the table with 2 fingers, slow, deliberate. I didn't do this for money, she said. I did it because you knocked on my door in a snowstorm and you needed help. That's the beginning and the end of it. Put that away. He looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but the look of a man recalibrating. He put the money away. He asked for a piece of paper and a pen. She gave him both. He wrote something, folded it, placed it beside his empty mug. Before he left, he took both her hands in her small ones in his large bandaged ones, and he said, "Thank you for opening the door, Dorothy." "Not many people would have," she said. "Well, you were cold." That seemed like the relevant fact. He smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. Then he thanked her again, picked up his own jacket, and walked out into the white morning. She stood in the doorway and watched him go. The big man in the canvas jacket, walking down a snow-buried street until he turned the corner and was gone. She went inside, picked up the folded paper, opened it, a phone number, and below it, in a clean, careful hand, "If you ever need anything, CH." She looked at the initials for a moment. Then she put the paper in the drawer with the medical bill. For almost 3 weeks, nothing happened. The furnace kept making its sound. The medical bill stayed in the drawer. Dot kept her Tuesday and Thursday mornings at the clinic, her Thursday evenings with the Peterson kids, her quiet rounds of the neighborhood. Normal life. She told Nora about the biker over the fence one afternoon, keeping it simple. Man's bike went down in the storm. He needed a warm place. She let him in. Nora asked if she'd been scared. Dot thought about it. No, she said. He was cold. That was the main thing. Nora looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Only you, Dot." Across the street, through his front window, Roger Hatch watched the 2 women talk over the fence the way he had watched Dot for 6 years, with the mild, unseeing attention of a man who had categorized his neighbor long ago and felt no need to revise. Retired nurse, modest means, kept to herself mostly. He had never brought her soup. He had never asked if she needed anything. He had shoveled his own driveway on the morning after the blizzard and not looked across the street to see whether hers had been done. It hadn't been. She'd done it herself, a 70-year-old woman with a bad knee, in the flat gray light of a January morning, and Roger had driven his black German sedan out of his freshly cleared driveway and not noticed. Then the strange thing started. A plumbing and heating company truck pulled up on a Wednesday morning. 2 men, uniforms, a work order. They told Dot they'd been contracted for a complimentary furnace inspection and full service call. Contracted by who? Dot said. The foreman checked his paperwork. Stormridge Foundation, he said. Community Assistance Program. No charge to you. Dot let them in because the furnace sound had gotten worse. They spent 2 hours on it, replaced 3 components, serviced the heat exchanger, tested every vent. When they left, the furnace ran quiet and clean for the first time in over a year. That evening, while they were working, the foreman noticed the kitchen table was still slightly uneven and fixed the leg with a shim from his toolkit. He did it without being asked, the way the man named Chris had done it in the dark of the storm. Quiet, practical, no announcement. Dot mentioned the foundation name to Nora over the fence. Nora looked it up on her phone. Registered on nonprofit. Los Angeles. Primary officer. C. Hemsworth. That night, Dot went to the kitchen, stood at the table for a moment, reached down and pulled out the magazine from under the leg, looked at the cover, looked at the logo in the corner of the wellness feature section. Small, circular, stylized C. The same as the one on the jacket. She put the magazine on the table this time, not under it. Now here is the part I want you to pay attention to. Because the easy version of this story ends here. Famous person does a nice thing, everybody goes home happy. But that's not what this is. What came next went further than that. A lot further. 2 days later, at 10 in the morning, on a Tuesday, a black Range Rover with California plates parked on Sycamore Drive. Dot, washing dishes at the kitchen sink, watched it through the window. A woman got out first. Sharp, professional, dark coat. Something organized about every movement she made. Then the passenger door opened. Tall, broad, canvas jacket, jeans, boots. Dot dried her hands on the dish towel. She was at the door before he knocked. She opened it before he finished the second knock. He was clean-shaven now. She could see the faint line of the cut she'd cleaned on his chin. Already healing well. He was wearing the same jacket. The center logo visible in the morning light. "Well," she said. The man from the couch, he smiled. "Dorothy," he said, "I was hoping we could talk." He sat down at her kitchen table. The same chair. He looked around the room. The oil lamp still on the windowsill. The furnace now running quietly. The drawer where the medical bill lived. And then he looked at her. "Now let me tell you something about Chris Hemsworth that most people don't know. Not the films, not the magazine covers. Who he actually was before any of that mattered. He grew up partly in the Northern Territory of Australia, a place called Bozeman, cattle country, the kind of outback where the nearest town was a long drive over dirt roads and the nights were absolute. His family moved around during his childhood, following work, following whatever was available. He was a teenager when he started boxing seriously. Not for sport, not for competition, but because it was what you did when you lived in places where physical capability was a language everyone spoke and the alternative was learning it the harder way. By the time he was 22 and doing his first professional work on Australian television, he'd spent years developing something that had nothing to do with acting. The ability to walk into any room and read it in 30 seconds. Who was stable? Who was frightened? Who was carrying more than they were showing? Those instincts didn't soften when the films came. They got sharper. 12 years into a career that had taken him to every major studio in the world, to franchise sets with budgets larger than some national economies. The habit that had never left him was this. He walked into every room and took stock of it. What was working? What wasn't? Who was being carried? Who was doing the carrying? Dot's house, the furnace, the medical bill, the 3-year-old storm film on the windows, the soup she hadn't made for herself. He'd taken all of it in that night. He'd been thinking about it every day since. He put his hands flat on the table. "Dot," he said, "I've been in rooms with people who had every advantage in the world, the money, the access, the network, and most of them would not have opened that door." He paused. "You had every reason not to. Every story the world has ever told you about who knocks on a door in the dark, you had those stories, and you opened it anyway." He shook his head slightly. "I've been trying to figure out what to do with that." He reached into his jacket and laid a folder on the table. "I'd like to propose something. Not charity. An investment. Can I walk you through it?" She nodded once. "Go ahead." The Stormridge Foundation was expanding its community wellness program into Montana. Bozeman specifically. On Millwright Street, 2 blocks from where they were sitting, there was a vacant building, An old hardware store, empty for 2 years since the owner retired. The foundation had purchased it the previous week. The plan: convert it into a community health and wellness center. Free preventive care consultations, nutrition programming, a workout space for people who couldn't afford a private gym membership, a kitchen, open 3 days a week, hot meals. He looked at her. "I need someone to run the health programming," he said. "Someone this community trusts. Someone who already knows what people here actually need." He paused. "I watched you work that night, with a first aid kit at 10:30 in the evening, on a stranger, with no hesitation. That's 34 years of knowing what you're doing. That doesn't retire." He turned to the next page. The medical bill, he didn't name it, but what he described covered it and more. Health coverage through the foundation's staff benefits. A salary that made her go still for a moment. Third page. A block grant for Sycamore Drive specifically. Sidewalk repair. 2 new streetlights on the south end where there were none. Renovation of the vacant lot at the end of the road into a proper outdoor space. Benches, a small playground, rubber surface. He closed the folder. "One more thing," he said. He said it the way people say the thing that matters most. Quietly, without preamble. "The Wellness Center. I'd like to name it." He looked at her. "The Gerald and Dorothy Callahan Community Wellness Center." The room went very quiet. Dot looked at Gerald's coat on the hook by the door. She'd put it back there after that night, instead of in the closet, and she hadn't asked herself why until right now. She looked at the folder. She looked at Chris Hemsworth sitting in the morning light in Gerald's kitchen chair, without anything to prove. The tears came the way they came to someone who didn't cry easily. Slow, almost reluctant, one at a time. Not grief, not gratitude exactly. The particular feeling of being seen by someone who had no obligation to look, who had looked anyway. He didn't speak. He just sat there and gave her the room. After a long moment, she pressed her palms flat on the table and took a breath. "Can I name the kitchen after Gerald, too?" she said. "Not just the clinical wing. The kitchen specifically." He didn't hesitate. "Name the whole building, whatever you want." She reached across the table, small hand. His larger one, the knuckles still faintly visible where she'd cleaned the gravel rash 3 weeks before. Shook. "Then we have a deal," she said. The construction started in March. Nora Beckett, who had been the first to sense something different about the stranger on Dot's couch, who had looked up the foundation name and said nothing until Dot was ready to talk, became the first hire. She ran physical therapy consultations on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, brought her full caseload from the sports medicine clinic, and within 6 weeks had a waiting list. That was Nora's moment. Not a ceremony, not a speech. Just her name on a door and a waiting room full of people who needed what she knew how to do. Frank Aldridge came twice a week. For the blood pressure checks, he'd been skipped for 3 years because he couldn't afford the clinic copay. The Peterson kids came Saturday afternoons for the youth fitness program. On opening day, 143 people came through the doors. Single parents, retired miners, young families who'd moved to Bozeman for work and found the cost of everything had outpaced their wages. Elderly residents who hadn't spoken to a healthcare provider in 2 years. A local TV crew showed up. A reporter asked Dot how it felt. She said, "It feels like work. We've got a lot of people to see." The camera crew laughed. The clip ran on the evening news and got shared widely, mostly because of the line and the expression on her face when she said it. The face of a woman who had always known that care was a verb, not a feeling. That night, across the street on Sycamore Drive, Roger Hatch watched the news segment from his living room couch. His wife, Karen, was beside him. On the screen, the reporter stood in front of the new wellness center on Millwright Street, describing how it had come to exist. A blizzard, a stranded man, a woman who opened her door. Roger watched. Then he watched the part where the reporter mentioned the street, Sycamore Drive. Then the part where Dot appeared on camera, in her apron, saying it felt like work. He watched her face. He recognized her. He recognized the street. He thought about the night of January 14th, He thought about the shape at his window. He thought about the step he'd taken toward his front door and then not taken. He didn't say anything to Karen. He picked up his glass. He set it back down. He didn't sleep well that night. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday morning, Roger crossed Sycamore Drive for the first time in 6 years of living there. He walked to Dot's front door. He knocked. When she opened it, he was holding a covered dish, Karen's recipe, a chicken casserole, the only thing he'd been able to think of that felt like the right shape for what he was trying to say. He looked at Dot. He was not a man who found this kind of thing easy. His jaw was tight the way it gets when someone has been rehearsing something and knows the rehearsal wasn't enough. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, "I owe you an apology." He paused. "That night in January, I saw someone at my door. I didn't open it." He looked at the dish in his hands, then back at her. "I've been telling myself it was a reasonable decision." He stopped. "I don't think it was. I think I didn't know who my neighbors were. I didn't let myself know. And I'm sorry for that." Dot looked at him. She looked at the casserole dish. She looked at his face, at the particular discomfort of a man doing something he should have done a long time ago, and knowing it. She opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. "I'll put the coffee on." He came in. He sat at her kitchen table. She poured 2 cups and they talked. Not easily at first, and then more easily, the way conversations go when both people have decided to be honest about something. He told her about the night, about the curtain, about the step he didn't take. She told him about Chris, about the whole of it, the foundation, Gerald's name on the wall. He listened the way a person listens when they're receiving information that reorganizes something in them. When he left an hour later, he stopped on the porch. "I'd like to volunteer," he said. "At the center. I don't have medical training, but I can do administrative work, scheduling, logistics. I spent 30 years in insurance. I understand paperwork better than most people understand their own names." Dot almost smiled. She told him to come by on Monday and ask for Nora. He nodded. He walked back across the street. He did not look like a man who had solved something. He looked like a man who had started something, which is a different and more useful thing. The scholarships came in the fall. $12,000 each, awarded at the Bozeman High Senior Assembly, to students who demonstrated community service and financial need. The Gerald and Dorothy Callahan Wellness Scholarship. The first recipient was a girl named Kaylee Norris who wanted to study nursing. The second was Brandon Pierce, who'd been working 20 hours a week while carrying a full class load and planned to study public health and come back. Dot presented to the awards. She stood at the podium, small and silver-haired, hands not entirely steady, and looked at those 2 young people and said, "This money is not a reward. It's an investment. Your only job is to make it worth something. The kind of worth that has nothing to do with money." The auditorium was quiet for a moment. Then it wasn't. In October, 9 months after the storm, on the anniversary of the night the blizzard came in, Dot was closing up the center alone. Past 9, the building quiet, restocking the consultation room. She was turning off the last light when she heard a motorcycle on Millwright Street. She looked through the front window and watched a man in a canvas jacket park a Harley at the curb, pull off his helmet, and look up at the sign above the door. She unlocked the front door and opened it. He looked the same. Jacket, jeans, boots. The center logo on the chest pocket. 1 year to the day. "Wanted to see it," he said. "For the ride. Seemed like the right stop this year." She opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. "I'll put the kettle on." He walked through the whole space slowly. The clinical wing, the consultation rooms, the kitchen with Gerald's name on the wall, beside the 6-burner commercial stove, the workout area where 3 people were still using the equipment at 9 in the evening because the center stayed open late on Thursdays. He looked at everything with the same careful attention she'd noticed that first night. The attention of a man making sure something real was actually real. In the kitchen, across from each other with 2 mugs of tea, she asked how the ride had gone. "Better than last year," he said. "Roads were dry." She laughed. He laughed. Something settled between them that didn't require explanation. Two people who understood that the most important things in a life rarely announced themselves. They just showed up, cold and shaking, on your porch and asked for nothing except the door. On the wall beside the kitchen window, someone had framed Dot's original hand-lettered proposal for the center's name. Under it, a small placard, named for Gerald Callahan, 1950 to 2016, and Dorothy Callahan, who opened her door. He read it. Was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about what you said that night," he said. "When I tried to pay you." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "What's that?" "You said I did it because you knocked on my door and you needed help. That's the beginning and the end of it." She nodded. "I've been in a lot of rooms," he said. "Rooms where everyone is running the numbers on what everything is worth. What you get for what you give." He shook his head slightly. "You didn't do any of that math. You just opened the door." She looked at him. "Gerald used to say the math people do in their heads about whether someone deserves help is almost always wrong," she said, "because they're calculating based on what the person looks like, not what the person needs." She paused. "The need is the only relevant variable." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want to put that somewhere. Can I put that on the wall?" She thought about it. "Right there," she said, next to the placard. "Done," he said. Outside, the October night was cold and clear. The new streetlights on Sycamore Drive were on. Across the street, in Roger Hatch's house, the front porch light was on too, the one that had been dark the night of the blizzard. A small thing. The kind of change that doesn't make the news. But Dot noticed it every time she came home. Inside the Gerald and Dorothy Callahan Community Wellness Center, the heater ran quietly, the light was warm, and 2 mugs of tea sat on a table between 2 people who had found each other in a blizzard and made something out of it, worth more than either of them could have predicted. The door was open for anyone who needed it. It would stay that way. There's a version of this story where it ends with the numbers. The scholarships, the square footage, the dollar figures. And those things matter. They're real, they changed real lives, they changed a street, they changed what a town thinks is possible. But the numbers aren't the point. The point is a 70-year-old woman who had every reason the world offers to keep her door shut and opened it anyway. Not because she knew who was out there. Not because she expected anything back. Because someone was cold, and that was the only calculation that mattered to her. And the point is the man across the street who finally, after 6 and 1 blizzard and 1 television clip, walked over with a casserole dish and said, "I didn't know who my neighbors were. I didn't let myself know." Because that sentence, that quiet, uncomfortable, honest sentence, is where change actually starts. Not in grand gestures, not in billion-dollar foundations. In the moment someone admits they could have opened the door and didn't, and decides to be different going forward. The hardest kind of courage is the quietest kind, and it belongs to anyone willing to take that one step across the street. What do you think about Dorothy's story and about Roger's? Have you ever had a moment where you chose to open the door, or a moment where you didn't, and you've been thinking about it since? Tell us in the comments right now. We read every single one, and your stories matter more than you know. If this one moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And subscribe so you're here for the next one. Because these stories exist everywhere. In every town the world drives through without stopping. We just have to look. This is a fictional dramatized story created for educational and inspirational purposes. All supporting characters, businesses, and events are fictional. Any resemblance to real persons other than Chris Hemsworth is coincidental. Narration is AI assisted.